something very close to John's heart and future coverage. Absolutely, yeah. And future coverage plans in general. But we had two awesome announcements, and we basically had two great hands-on opportunities that we got to talk about, right?
That's right. We got to see the two new Nightdive remasters, which is Turok III and Dark Forces.
Yeah,
So, all right. So Turok III is the Turok game, the single-player game that was stuck on Nintendo 64. It was heavily influenced by Half-Life, but it has a lot of its own ideas. I did a Let's Play with it not so long ago with Audie, actually. And it's a really cool game, but it was locked on N64. They have tackled that now. So we actually played through... You actually played most of that one, actually.
I almost finished the first level, actually.
Yeah, so it cleans up everything as you'd expect.
Yeah, it's
full advanced, lighting with shadow maps. Now they redid all the art and assets at a higher resolution. I'm curious to see if they'll allow you to use the original assets as an option.
Yeah, because
they might.
They may, but like those textures are so low res, and I like this. I know, yeah, and like there's some interesting aspects of it. That game is a lot slower paced than T1, and even slower paced than T2's Turok 2, that is. So it has a different feel, and it was balanced around the N64 controller and frame rate. So, and the enemy size, because they were trying to keep the frame rate up. So it's like low enemy counts on the lower difficulty level there. But they were, I asked so are you gonna change this up at all? Because you've changed up Turok 2, you've changed up Turok 1, and they're like, yeah, we're changing things up. Not so much the level design, but more so if you up the difficulty, we actually want to add in more enemies and things like that.
Yeah, they are doing some tweaks to sort of improve the gameplay for those playing with a modern controller or a mouse and keyboard, right?
Yeah, because, obviously the N64 was a very different beast for those things.
So yeah, that is really great news, I think, to see this running on a modern platform and get this proper re-release coming to all the consoles and the PC as well. Mm-hmm. I was really impressed again though with what that game did, even for the time. Like the lip sync and the cutscenes, that kind of stuff. You don't expect to see that from such an older console with a 3D.
Yeah,
right.
The fact that it ran on N64, and it may actually run better than Turok 2.
It does.
Yeah,
it is actually slightly better.
So the fact that it looked better than Turok 2 in many ways. I was wondering, we got to the later part of the first level where there was enemies really far away. And I was even wondering, how would you have even seen those enemies on N64?
I don't know. Yeah, some of the snipers.
They would have been less than a pixel. No way.
So that was really great. I will definitely want to cover that one. Do some nice comparisons with the original. We'll see how that goes. But then the other one was Star Wars Dark Forces, which is the quintessential LucasArts first-person shooter, kind of a Doom clone, as it would have been called at the time, but I actually think it's so much more. It's a mission-driven first-person shooter that did some very cool stuff conceptually that we hadn't seen before at the time. So there's actually more story segments in between the missions.
Yes.
And actually I want to mention that first. So all those cutscenes, where they use that hand-drawn art and some of the CGI renders of the Dark Troopers and such, they've redone all of them.
Yeah.
So the guy that did that remade the intro cutscenes for Quake 2, he did this for Dark Forces as well, and it looks phenomenal. It's extremely faithful to the original, but it's beautiful.
Yeah, and so that's the interesting part about Nightdive. They're enhancing, but also preserving. So that part is enhanced, and some of the hand-drawn stuff there looks like paint overs in a really good way. And then the CGI is new CGI, but it's faithful to that look.
Exactly.
And but then when you get in the game and some of the pre-game difficulty levels switching and all these things, that is we're trying to keep the look of that original game. And I think you can talk about that too, because that game is a software rendered game originally back in the day, and I don't think it has correct 3D perspective.
It does.
In its software mode. It does when you look up and down. I couldn't.
Oh no, not that. No. It doesn't have that, and it didn't have that here either.
Yeah, it didn't have that here either. So they were maintaining that in that software mode. And
yeah,
that was interesting.
That was interesting as well. But it does have a hardware accelerated mode now as an option. So you get the full frame rate that you'd expect. They actually added some neat visual touches, sort of glow. So lights and laser blasts can actually glow now. And they also fixed, I would say, the end of the first stage, if you remember, there's the ship that comes in to take you off world.
Oh yeah.
Which is actually a 3D object, which was amazing at the time. but it ran at a very low frame rate.
Yeah,
and now it's completely smooth. It looks awesome when it comes in. So basically all those little rough patches, they've been cleaned up as you'd expect. Higher resolution, some new visual options that you can toggle on and off depending on you want. And things like for the soundtrack, for instance, you can have the sort of general MIDI style with the you know, sort of the synth wavetable sound. I think it's like a Roland.
It sounded Roland-y, like you said.
Right, but then you also have the option to use the OPL3 FM synth soundtrack if you prefer, which is how a lot of people played it back in the day.
For sure.
So you get that option as well. So there's just a ton of stuff like that. It's also widescreen now, of course, which is great.
That's a big difference. And, you know, that's a game, the reason why it's good, like, unlike Quake 2, you can technically run on a modern, you can actually run GL Quake 2, like, on a modern PC if you really wanted.
There's lots of source ports anyway.
And there's a lot of source ports for that game. But for a game like this is really stuck on DOS.
I felt like there was one attempt at some point to, like,
what was that called?
But it never,
oh, yeah.
It never really, this is a game that never really got any great source ports that I remember.
There was one that was like kind of left
like Dark
unfinished.
XL or something?
Yeah, it was left unfinished. And then there's been there's also community efforts that have been coming up in the most recent years, like aside from Nightdive, that are doing something similar, I think, right now. But Nightdive bring it out in a viable form. It's not just PC here.
Yeah, consoles as well.
Like, that's a big deal. Like, it'll be on all the consoles that you can think of, most likely. We didn't ask specific ones, but it's going to probably be on all of them, much like the other Nightdive releases are. And yeah, it's about preserving that incredible legacy of a game there.
And Dark Forces is incredible. I recommend everyone play it.
FPS. Really good FPS.
There's a quick supporter question I actually think is quite important that we should tackle here, and it comes again from Martin Peters.
All right.
Atari took over Nightdive Studios in May this year, but with the recent announcements, Star Wars Dark Forces, Turok III, and recently released Quake 2, what do you think Atari's intent is with Nightdive? Do you think these are just projects Nightdive already signed on to long before the takeover, so had to finish them, and that Atari has plans afterwards to make Nightdive focus on Atari IPs? Or do you think Atari will keep allowing Nightdive to make to make remasters of games from other publishers and developers? This is quite interesting because the tone of the question is set by the perception of the old Atari, right? And basically the reset button was pressed, and the first product we had from the new Atari was basically Atari 50, right? Which was awesome. Right. So it's kind of, I get where the question is coming from here, but it's not the Atari you possibly think it is.
Yeah, the guys that took over, from what we understand, it's like they're actually like serious. They love this stuff, right? They're in it because they like the games. It's not just about being the corporate overlord. They actually want to bring this stuff back. Atari 50 was an example of that.
Yes.
And they really value what Nightdive does, and they want them to be able to continue to do that. And the way they kind of described it is like, you know, Nightdive does all of this stuff, but then they still have to worry about all the things like legal and HR and helping negotiate this stuff, like having that sort of backing of now a larger company that's sort of rebuilding from the ground up. That helps them focus more on just making this stuff, I'd imagine.
Yeah. Also, like you said, procuring IP is another aspect of it.
Exactly.
And I think, like you just said in the beginning, Atari, based on everything we just experienced while we were in that meeting and elsewhere, like, it's about the people we talked to was like, actually, they care about these old games. And sure, they have their own IP, but they're also really keen on making sure Nightdive's making the games they want to make.
Exactly. So we'll see how it plays out, but it certainly sounds like things will continue to be quite
just
as we know them.
So, if not better.
That's good news.
Not better, yeah.
Absolutely.